Our next program, a lot of what we're focusing on today emanates from some horrific tragedy that has affected our neighboring state, the Nutmeg State, Connecticut, Sandy Hook. And the aftermath of the Sandy Hook situation, the parents of some of the children that were killed that day, were murdered that day, formed Sandy Hook Promise. And Sandy Hook Promise is a nonprofit. They do a lot of work. They don't have a large staff, but they have a national reach in that their presentations and their programs are in virtually every state in the nation. We have one of their volunteers, Christina Rezalewski. I did that wrong, didn't I? Yep, I knew I did. My apologies to all my Polish friends. Is here to talk a little bit about what Sandy Hook Promise does and some of their programs. You may be interested. They will come to your school district or your school and do a program. This one is Know the Signs, but they also have several other programs that they deal with. One is how to get kids to introduce themselves to other children, to start that friendship bond earlier. They also do a lot of fundraising and awareness around incidents and school safety. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Christina. She is a proud parent of 2 children in the Coventry School District. And she works in Boston, but that doesn't prevent her from coming down to Rhode Island, or actually going out to Rhode Island school districts and repeatedly making this presentation. So without further ado, Christina.
Wonderful, thank you. So, if you will, I have a story for you. So, imagine 3 years ago, I have 2 young little girls. I also have 3 older stepchildren who have gone through the Coventry school system. My daughter at the time was 4 years old and entered the school system as a pre-K student. So she was in the school with everyone else. And after work one day, I'm cooking dinner, and I hear my older daughter and younger daughter, who was 2 at the time, playing. And they're pretending they're at school, and Sophia, who was 4, is pretending to be the principal, Mrs. Mandisi, and she's saying, "Lockdown, lockdown, lockdown, lockdown." And I'm like, what's going on? So I listened a little more, and she then ushers my younger daughter into the bathroom and says, "Now, Talia, you have to hide in here and you can't say anything. You have to be very quiet, because if a bad guy comes into our school, this is what you have to do. You have to hide and you can't say anything." And my heart dropped, as you can imagine. So I quickly kind of redirected their play and got them doing something else, and I went back and continued to cook dinner. And I was fighting back tears. I'm almost fighting back tears telling you this story because it's so vivid in my memory, because I realized that's the reality of our students today. It's a needed reality. We need to teach them how to protect themselves in these situations, but that is the reality. And I thought about, as I was going to school, all we practiced was fire drills, evacuations, and earthquake drills. I grew up in California. But this is what my kids are going to experience going to school. And so as the days and then the months and the years went by, I quickly started realizing all of these other events were happening, whether it be violence because of more school shootings, or bullying, or even suicide amongst young folks. And I was feeling very helpless and very hopeless, if you will. And I've heard that same sentiment from other parents as well. And I said, I have to do something different. I have to figure out how to rechannel this and be more proactive and put a positive spin on it, because otherwise I'm just going to turn into a depressed person myself. And I'm so happy that I found Sandy Hook Promise, and I'm really thrilled to be able to share with you today the free programs that are available to all of Rhode Island, to all of the schools around the country. And the hope is that you'll consider how they can benefit the students in your district and really help these students with their social and emotional health and well-being, and hopefully continue to prevent these events before they happen. Before I do that, I would like to say thank you to all of you for your service and for advocating for our students, because they're what's most important to us as we consider what the future holds. So let me click forward here and tell you a little bit more. So, as Tim said, Sandy Hook Promise was founded by the parents who lost loved ones in 2012. What I love about this program and this approach is that if you think about the concept of gun violence, and it can be very polarizing, right? You're either for it or against it. Sandy Hook Promise brings together people of all beliefs and backgrounds, and it's not necessarily about removing the gun, but instead it's about how do we prevent these events before they occur. So there's people who are avid gun owners, but they value the children, and that's what we come together for. And they do that in a couple of different ways. The first is that we organize on a national level to educate parents and students and community organizations. The second is through local Promise leaders like myself. So I'm a volunteer. I'm not a gun safety expert. I am not a violence expert, and I'm not an educator. I'm a parent, I'm a management consultant, and I advise HR leaders on a regular basis. The third way is developing programs that deal with mental health and social issues, as well as gun safety practices. And then finally, policy changes on a national level. They advocate for a variety of different policy changes. So as you can see, really there's a lot of positivity that's around this, and there's a number of different approaches, but the primary form or voice is through parents and volunteers and educators such as yourself. All right, so before I get into the programs, the one thing that, as I was looking through the research that stood out to me is that overwhelmingly schools are safe. But they're not immune to threats of violence, to suicide, or anything of that nature. And one statistic that stood out to me was that over 1 million students missed more than one day of school last year because they felt unsafe. Imagine that. More than one day of school missed because they felt unsafe. And this was whether they felt unsafe on a bus or going to and from school, or even in the classroom. And that really resonated with me because my daughter, now in first grade, she missed school last year several days because she felt unsafe in the classroom at first grade. That's concerning. So I think there's more, we can do better as a community, and that is really why I'm here. So we aim to really educate, again, both the community, teachers, administrators, as well as parents around the signs, and that's why the program is called Know the Signs, that are there to help assess risks and intervene before a gun or any other weapon or form of violence is even brought into the equation. And we do that with several programs. And again, these programs are free, no cost. Curriculum's already written. There's several supporting materials. The first two programs, Start with Hello and Say Something, are aimed at students themselves. And I'll tell you about each of them in detail in a minute. The second program, Safety Assessment and Intervention, and the SOS program, which focuses on suicide prevention, are more targeted at education professionals and other adults, school psychologists, the police force or resource officers. And then the last program, the Save Promise Club, is a student-led organization. So let's take a look at some of the elements of each of them. Start with Hello is the first program, and this is the program that really got my attention when I first started looking for what could I do. Start with Hello focuses on, if you imagine a time when you've ever felt isolated or dismissed or alone or marginalized, And now imagine that on a daily, weekly, if not monthly basis, and imagine that as a child. This program will take a look at how to build a culture of inclusiveness and community and connectedness. And it's based on a series of trainings and supporting materials and activities to really get kids to start to connect with each other. It, again, is free. There are parent resources that can be sent home or ways for parents to be included so that you start to build that, again, as a community. February, there's a week in February every year where there is a Start with Hello week nationwide. And if you go on Google or YouTube, you can see a series of videos where students across the country have put together very interesting events, things like No One Eats Alone, where they have table topics and they mix up kids at lunchtime so that they're really getting to make sure that nobody's by themselves. And also an opportunity for the children to be able to connect with each other around topics they might not know that they have in common. I know East Greenwich Schools participated last year in this, and I've heard great feedback about the program and how it went. And I'm so happy to share as well that Coventry Schools has committed to not only participate in the week in February this year, but they've also committed to kick off the school year with a Start with Hello activities to reinforce that sense of inclusivity. What I love so much about this program, let me just go to the next slide for you here with some success stories, is as a management consultant, I speak with CEOs on a regular basis around the concept of diversity and inclusion and the impact that that has on business results. This is such a critical culture and skill set that we need to teach our children, not only to let them have success here at a young age, but to prepare them to be adults in the business world. So I can't say enough about this program. I really feel like it has a lot of value and gets at preventing these issues of bullying, of violence, before there's even a chance to bring any kind of weapon to school. So that's the first program. Oh, and I should say, this is aimed at students who are in grades 2 and higher. The next program is called Say Something. I really wanted to show a video to you all, but it was so large that I couldn't embed it and send it. So let me try to summarize it for you somewhat. If you think back to the most recent school shootings that have taken place, and as you listen to the news reports after the fact, what's in common with many of these is that there were signs. Somebody knew something, somebody posted something on social media, individuals were informed in some way or form. This program, which is targeted at students in grades 5 and higher, builds a community around knowing what those signs are, especially targeted at social media, and helps them to understand how to take action and intervene through a trusted adult. And it also helps to train those trusted adults with regard to what their steps should be and what they should be doing. So this program also has a week that is nationwide, and it's in October. And there's a secondary piece of it, and I will tell you there's some success stories here as well. I have a 2-page document of lists with where this has worked really well and specific examples of when people have actually come forward and said something and how acts of violence have been stopped. But in addition to the curriculum that's written, the parent resource guides, educator guides and whatnot, there's also a digital platform. So this is really helpful for those older aged school students, perhaps high school, where you can digitally deliver this content if needed. So this one's called Say Something. The next program is a safety assessment and intervention. Now I realize that some of you may already have programs with your community or within schools to do threat assessments or safety assessments. This particular program can support that. It aims to bring together a cross-disciplinary commitment or community, resource officers, school psychologists, educators, maybe even parents in the community that want to be active in this. It's a 6-hour training, again, free of charge, and brings together what to do and how to perhaps be more current in assessing the risks that are there today, considering social media, if you will. The last formal program is this SOS program. With so many mental health issues today, we know that quite often, even at a younger age, people are saying something. There is a training program that is provided. It's video-based to offer at assemblies or within a classroom that help to simulate how to respond and interact with individuals when they do start to express symptoms of depression. What to do once you do respond, who do you inform, how do you tell, how do you help individuals before it's too late? And then finally, the last program that I'd like to share with you is the Save Promise Club. And again, if you go onto YouTube, you can Google and see some wonderful examples of how students have really taken the ownership of these programs and brought them to their community and to their schools. The Save Promise Clubs are run by students. They can be a standalone club or they can be embedded into any other sort of club. They are required to implement at least one of the programs in their school for that year. It's a great opportunity. I've heard examples of some of these Save Promise Clubs in high schools or middle schools giving back to the elementary schools, particularly with the Start With Hello programs where perhaps they're there to be greeters and say hello. And other options I've heard as well as they've been like buddies or mentors to the younger children. We've heard that they're very effective, meeting as little as once a month, but and some of them will have events like quarterly within their schools. And you see a listing here of some of the schools that we do know of that have Save Promise Clubs here in Rhode Island, in Cumberland, North Smithfield, and Providence. So, I would like to encourage all of you to really consider how this might work in your school districts. The other thing that really inspires me about these programs is they're not necessarily black and white cookie cutter. So there is curriculum, there are some ideas about ways to implement them, but even in Coventry, we're talking about, for instance, the Start With Hello program, how each of the individual schools might make this look a little bit different and unique given their population. Again, the programs are free, and even before that, you can sign up yourselves to become Promise leaders like myself, which just means that you're going to continue to get additional examples of how these programs are implemented, what's happening at an advocacy level, and ideas for how to bring them to your own school district. There's tons of resources that are available. You can simply sign up online. As you can see, all of these programs are ready to go. Once you sign up, you can download the content. I have content of every program with speaking points. I have the educator guides. It's all there, very easy. And they complement any efforts that are already in place within your schools, which is great. I do know that because funding is so restricted for many of us this year, that why not take advantage of these free programs and offerings that are already there to really help to bolster your programs within your schools. So with that, before we ask questions, I would just say we've already trained over 2 million people in all 50 states. If you want more information about how to bring this program to your school, you can reach out to me. I'll leave my information with Tim. Kathy has it as well, and I'd be happy to help, guide you on the right path or even come speak at your school. In addition to that, you can reach out to programs at Sandy Hook Promise, and they'll provide additional information as well. So with that, let me ask you, what questions do you have? It aims at all, it's so well-rounded that it talks to the parents, it talks to the students and the administrators to really drive home that message. And since everybody's hearing the same message, the hope is that there will be more and better ways to address it. So for instance, if a student said something to, if your child said something to you, you know, Mom, I saw this picture, rather than them even saying something, there might be an opportunity for you to then share it. So it's really aiming to get at the holistic environment and community to really bring that forward and take action.
Christine, this is really a follow-up to that. So in our district safety committee, we were talking, there's an app, Sandy Hook Promise has an app. Does that work outside? So the question came up, they thought it worked only, someone thought it worked only within Connecticut. I asked the question online and didn't get a response that really answered my question. So I just wondered if that app is available, if it's free. We use an anonymous, you know, we have some place on our website where students can, or anybody can report anonymously. It gets very few hits. And I'm just thinking Sandy Hook Promise, you know, might attract or feel safer. You know, if it's not a district, you know, labeled as such, it certainly would be ours. But I just wondered if you knew any more about that.
It's a great perspective, and so I have seen the app. I also inquired from my Promise Leader community. I will get back to you. I don't know the answer because they haven't responded yet. I was hoping to be prepared and armed with information about it coming here today, but I haven't heard back yet. So yeah, I was looking at the cost.
Thank you. Thank you for being a Promise Leader and for everything that you're doing with Sandy Hook Promise. So I'm from East Greenwich, and we did implement Start with Hello. So I have a comment and then also a question. So the comment is that the initial idea to implement this in the district originated in our mental health subcommittee, which is a subcommittee of our health and wellness committee. So that was great that it originated there. One of the members of that subcommittee is our Director of Student Services. And it was because that committee decided to ask her to bring it to an administrative council meeting, which includes all of the principals in the school district, that we were able to get the internal buy-in to make it happen. I mean, it was literally 3 weeks before Start with Hello Week. And she had a meeting with the administrative council that week, and everybody just jumped on it, was super excited about it, and we were able to do amazing things that week. But I think it really requires that internal buy-in of your district leadership, not just at the school committee level or at the subcommittee level, but the internal leaders to really make it happen in the schools. And I was really proud of how they embraced it and how well it was received by the faculty and students that whole week. So it was great. And we'll do it again. The bummer was that we were implementing it at the same time that we had an incident in our school district. It was a student who allegedly was uploading images of guns, and it was a student that some students and parents were concerned about. And it kind of all happened at the same time. And what ended up happening was the parents were talking about this on Facebook, freaking the kids out. There was little that could be said by district administration because students have privacy rights. And so, you know, I knew that we were following proper protocols, but of course we weren't responding to the community in a fashion and in a time frame that made them comfortable. And the whole thing kind of blew up. And there was a backlash at the parent level with the Start with Hello campaign because, you know, people immediately say, you know, it's not my child's responsibility to reach out to another child who clearly has issues. And we shouldn't be putting it on other students. And so, you know, they clearly were coming from a place of fear. And it just, the fact that the two things coincided was really unfortunate because I don't think there's any parent in the abstract who would say that building inclusive communities is not a good idea. But when you're in the middle of dealing with an incident and fear kind of takes over, there's a tendency to kind of dismiss initiatives that are really about creating that kind of inclusivity. And not even just dismissiveness, but active hostility toward any suggestion that starting with hello is an answer to anything. And so I was just wondering if Sandy Hook Promise had kind of dealt with any of the backlash in terms of that kind of an approach, and if you have any suggestions for school districts in terms of community education. You know, it's great when the schools take off with it, and like I said, it was really well received by faculty and students, but is there a community education piece that can really, you know, it's best to do it outside of an incident, but I'm just wondering, have you dealt with that issue before? Were you aware that that had happened in East Greenwich? And do you have any suggestions for how we might deal with it better in the future?
It's not, start with hello is not going to, you know, you deliver it and everything's better and we're done, right? That's not going to solve the problem. It's about starting to build that sense of community and connectedness. So when we sought to start bringing this to Coventry, which hasn't even happened yet, by the way, I approached Kathy and I approached the superintendent, and he was all over it. But before we even got there, we said, you know, how is this going to work in the actual schools? Are the teachers going to buy into this? Are they going to want to teach this? Are they going to speak to it? How are we going to get to the parents? We also were talking simultaneously with parents. So I think, to your point, it's great that the school was championing this, but how do you start to get buy-in from the parents as well and have them own part of this? And that's the approach we're taking forward. So even though Craig Levis is saying we're doing this, our next step is going to each of the PTAs and asking, how can you help support bringing this to life in your school? How do we make this unique to your school? The other programs, so the threat assessment, Say Something, that might be the next piece to start to implement, because again, Start with Hello is not the be-all end-all, and having 1 week a year is not going to change the events that take place. But collectively, Sandy Hook Promise really believes that all 5 of the programs collectively, over time, will start to have an impact on our community and our children. The other thing that we are looking to do in Coventry that we've been brainstorming about is how do we involve other parts of the community? So, can we go to the Senior Citizen Center and involve them in perhaps helping to make posters or to make some of the supplies that will be part of a Start with Hello week? How do we involve perhaps dads, because we know that quite often it's the moms that are, sorry dads, volunteering in the schools. How do we get those coaches that the kids see when they're playing sports or other activities? How do we maybe just get them to greet kids that are getting off the buses so they're like, oh, my dad or my coach is here? How do we involve more than just the usual folks to really have them start to buy into this, and that they start to see that it really is all of our town that's coming together? Does that help answer your question? Hi, Kristen.
So for those of you who are thinking, does my superintendent know about this? We've met with Mark from your program, and he's doing presentations and connections with each of the superintendents. So this is an opportunity for you to say to your superintendent, I had a wonderful opportunity to hear something about this program. We'd like to do it. They're already at that foundation level, and there is knowledge throughout the state of this wonderful piece. Thank you.
For your service and for advocating for our children. If you have any additional questions, or again would like to talk about this in more detail individually within your district, I'd be happy to help out. Yes? Sandy Hook Promise. Sandy Hook Promise funds all the programs. I will say the caveat though, so for instance, like with Start with Hello Week, depending on what activities you choose, like if you're gonna have posters or a special lunch, or if people are gonna wear green shirts, those types of things, obviously the PTA or some other funding would be needed. But the actual curriculum, it's already built, the delivery of the programs, volunteers, that's where that all comes into play. Thank you.